Good tidings, all you beautiful individuals. League Unlock has returned. Eric and Mark here with you guys for some more summer highlights. So many teams still making their debuts, their first steps on the Rift. A lot of them first steps on the stage in what feels like it's been 3 years. Hasn't quite been that long, obviously, but the last year and a half has kind of felt that way.
Time has felt like a circle the last couple of years, the way it has been.
Matthew McConaughey,
everything
he knows, man. He knows.
Hey, everything around the world feeling that way. So yeah, definitely nice to see some of these teams stepping out onto the stage for the first time in what is a long time.
And we're starting Gen G versus DRX. This is another year, another split where Gen G doesn't make any changes. They're just rolling back the 2020 roster. The play style hasn't really changed, and it's DRX. This is the split. We want to see them kind of step into that contender status with the other top four of, Hanwha, T1, Gen G, and of course Damwon. And I'll tell you what, game one, they looked like they'd reached that status.
Game one was exactly what you needed to be seeing from DRX to start out the summer split. We had seen throughout spring the glimpses, the signs, and still growth and potential for this team, for that 5-man lineup and what they were putting out. Game number one, you saw a lot of those trends that you wanted to continue in summer going on, and especially the big one for me, dominating performance and shot calling coming through from the man in the jungle himself, Piosik.
Have you ever seen a more alpha, more Chad level of Xin Zhao play? I know it helps when you have a Lulu in the top lane, but he was not afraid that entire game.
I think the only one I've ever seen more Chad, more alpha energy has been when I've seen T1, Tyler 1, not T1 the organization, Tyler 1 playing the Xin Zhao.
T1.
That's how exactly. That's how you know you're getting to that next level. That's what type of aggression, type of absolute confidence in your own gameplay. That's what we were seeing from Piosik in game number one against Gen G.
Really like that Xin pick with the Lulu, and of course the Jinx for Bao was standout in that game. As the series goes on, though, and as has been typical Gen G we've seen over the last several splits, eventually a series kind of shifts and they start to kind of dictate the pace of play. You saw it begin to happen in game two where things get slowed down, because when Gen G looks at their weakest, it's always the other team being in the driver's seat. All you have to look at is the G2 series at Worlds. When it's the other team being the aggressor, fighting constantly in the early game, Gen G looks completely lost. They didn't look completely lost in game one, but definitely got things back on track in game two.
And this felt like watching, two martial artists fighting against each other, and the other one's just throwing every type of punch that they can. The other one's just holding back, blocking them all. And then eventually he's like, all right, I've got your pattern. I know your style that you're trying to bring at me. Here's what I can do in return. That's what game two felt a lot of the way in this series, seeing the firepower that DRX was able to put through and get the early advantages and carry that through in game one was completely stopped and held up in game number two by the wall of Gen G.
Yeah, and I mean, it was pretty consistent play from most of the players for Gen G. And if you're keeping the boxing analogy, it goes into the third game where you can talk about a lot of the games Gen G isn't getting that sick knockout blow. They're not getting the KO. It's going to the decision. It's pretty clearly in their favor. It goes to full rounds, and you're kind of left like, okay, that wasn't the ending that I was looking for, because game three was the ultimate Gen G game. Not only do you have Azir for BDD pulling that one out, but you also just have low kills, huge gold advantage for Gen G.
It's somewhat strange because normally you describe the level of control, the methodicalness that they can go through this game three victory for Gen G, and you would think that, oh wow, it must have been so dominating. You must be leaving this series feeling so overwhelmed at the way that Gen G closed it out. And even though it's the exact opposite, even though looking at the score lines for a lot of players are fantastic, you had standout plays coming across from someone like Life's Thresh in the bottom lane. Yet, as you said, it still feels so formulaic from a Gen G that you get this performance and then you get into cruise control in this type of way of winning in game three. unfortunate on the side of DRX that you're still left wanting more, and at the end of the day, feeling somewhat disappointed in the overall performance, not the effort, but the performance on the day from the young squad, and not nearly feeling positive enough about this victory for Gen G.
Now, we got to touch on how do we because we saw the Lulu and Xin Zhao work so well for them in that first game. They throw in the Ezreal Yuumi in the bot lane to go with the Lucian mid, the double AD comp. Yuumi and Lulu. How we feeling about that? Been a while since we saw Yuumi.
Yeah, it has been a while. I'm not the biggest fan. I wasn't certainly convinced by any means what we saw. I wasn't convinced in Champ Select, even more so by what we saw in game.
Convinced after the game.
Exactly, and that is not the direction that you want to be going. I think the other thing that I do want to touch upon is sure, in the vacuum of Azir, mid lane matchups, the Lucian works out. As we saw throughout the rest of the map, it didn't work anywhere else outside of that mid lane.
Yeah, and obviously we know how good BDD is on Azir. The laning phase is almost irrelevant for him. He's going to get the sick ultis to get some of these fights started. So Gen G starts 1-0 on the split, and we see it time and time again in the split. Gen G is incredibly consistent, especially against teams below them in the standings. They rarely get upset, it seems, but they also rarely upset, even though they did against T1, you could say, in the playoffs.
Yeah, this is a incredibly, as far as 3-game series go, this was an incredibly steady and consistent performance for a victory from Gen G. But you contrast that to what we saw, the excitement, the firepower in a T1 Hanwha series from a T1 that should be in the same, level of eliteness in the LCK, challenging the same type of top end teams. This performance does not stack up enough.
It's a lot of it to do with just the excitement on the Rift, right? That's why a lot of people are always wanting more out of Gen G, but they pick up the dub to go 1-0 DRX 0-1 in their debut. The other LCK match, we had Nongshim versus KT, a couple of perennial defenders, gatekeepers of that playoff bubble. They're going to be vying for that 5-6 seed between these two. And I swear, I was flashed back to 2016 because we had Blank and Peanut going head-to-head in the jungle. It was just like the good old days.
I gotta say, one of the biggest things right out of the gate that stood out, and we talked about this many times during MSI, is seeing the junglers have to pick up the different champions that were coming through. And I know they've got a lot of skill, but sometimes you get into a bit of a habit, a bit of a pattern of what you're having to play. And I tell you what, you're not utilizing all those skills, all that great mechanical prowess that you've been building up over your career when you're just picking Udyr time after time again. That's not what we had in this series. We had some exciting mechanical jungle picks come through. And even if it wasn't super mechanical, talking about a champion like Rumble, you had to be thinking about the difference that we have seen from junglers playing a Rumble that is not comfortable with it, right? We equated this to back when ADCs were playing things like Vlad and how they look completely different to your top lane Vlad that you were going to go up against, and the different in the lethality. Same thing in the jungle, and especially with Rumble, the way to utilize the ultimate. That ultimate is so vital and powerful, and putting it in the right spots, the right choke points in a lot of team fights absolutely can swing things around. And you saw that in this series come through from the veteran Blank.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it was 2016, because Blank was on the Rift and he was popping off. Game 1, he was incredible. This wasn't no Agent 612. This was Agent 60,000 that was dominating the early game on that Rumble pick. He looked incredibly comfortable. You also had Gory making his LCK debut. This is a guy who was on T1 Academy for a long time. He was on EDG Academy behind Scout. So the dude has literally learned behind Faker and Scout.
And you can see it. You can see that come through a little bit on the Rift for sure.
Not in game 1. You didn't see it in game 1.
It's certainly not there, but the overall of the series is where I'll allow it and say that, you know what, you're leaving this one feeling like it was a, maybe outside of statistics, a successful debut to some degree.
Yeah, game 1, 1-5-1 on the TF. Game 2, he comes back on the Akali and completely dominates the game to a tune of 9-1-8, which would eventually force that third game. But he looked really good in game 2. And listen, you got to highlight it anytime it happens. Gwen loses. You got to highlight it.
It's not impossible to take down Gwen and everything else. It also is a very good reminder, and the way that you saw it utilized in this game, Gwen is not an insta win, right? As much as we like to joke and make these type of things around, even 200 years of Felios, sometimes it needs to come around, needs to be something happening. This one with the Gwen, putting it in too many situations where you're just asking for too much out of it, and it's like, this is not only the champion, but the individual piloting cannot output this.
And listen, even with the mobility that Gwen has, all these top laners that aren't running flash, just camp them. Camp the living hell out of them. You've seen that happen a couple of times today with some of the Gwen players. So we go into that third game, and this is where some more spicy jungle picks come in, because Peanut pulls out the Echo Jungle. Obviously something that's been meta throughout the years, but not in 2021.
Nope. And then, of course, what's the response? You got to be thinking on the side. You got to get the Diana busted out and have some extra fun with the champions that we've seen coming through.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun jungle picks. And this game, bless his heart, KT Doran, a guy who was getting memed on DRX, memed early on in his time with KT. But the Gwen and then the Irelia in game 3, my man was doing all that he could to get KT the dub.
He tried so hard, but it just, in the end, it didn't matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter. Nongshim comes away with that game 3 win. I will say there was some questionable moments where you were like, okay, these guys aren't quite at the upper echelon of the LCK, but I have faith enough that both of these squads are good enough to be a playoff team.
Yes, I would agree with that, but at the same time, as you alluded to, all this really did for me, coming on the heels of what we just talked about, well, okay, not feeling so, as impressed as you might have been with Gen G's performance, given the fireworks that you had from T1. Well, and the same thing for this regard and what you're talking about with this level of skill in the LCK and where they should be in the standings. I'm looking at Freddie Brion and what we got from them just in the past, and this is absolutely teams where you can stack up against and take the whole match and series away from them, looking at what you can do to be a playoff squad in the LCK.
I think it's been a long time since we've had, 3 teams that you might feel comfortable getting that final 1 or 2 playoff spots. We might be talking about that in summer, but yeah, I'm riding the Freddie Brion train too. I think they're still the front runners for that spot after 1 week of action. Not even 1 full week, 1 game of action for a lot of these guys, but a 1-0 start for Nongshim, 0-1 for KT. Over in the LPL, we've had some changes. We've had rebrands. We've had some roster swaps. One of the bigger ones was, of course, LGD. Because after 1 split away, playing 5-6 games with JDG, GA says, you know what? I actually kind of want to start games. So I'm going to come back to LGD, who I went to Worlds with in 2020. And also the return of Shadow. Yes, we are talking about Mad Lions Shadow. Everyone questioned, where'd this guy go? Well, now he's in the LPL making his debut alongside GA with LGD.
And he's making that debut. And after 1 game, 100% win rate for Shadow and LGD to start things off against Rare Adam.
Yeah.
Game number 1 in this match. Very much in the control of LGD and what you wanted to be seeing, and what you talk about with a debut is Shadow in the LPL. Some of that aggression, some of that, do or die type of attitude that we saw with him on the Mad Lions, that's absolutely still there.
Yeah, one of these other junglers who looked very comfortable on that Rumble pick. GA looked incredibly comfortable on the Silas to take that first game. Game 2 is where things got kind of crazy in this series, because it looked like it was just going to be a nice, clean 2-0 for LGD. Nothing to think about. 6.5k gold lead. Nah, that's not the LPL way, and that's not the way that things happen when there's a Viego in the game.
It is insane. Some of these things, and it just to remind yourself that we had all a spring without Viego and talking about
the good old
days.
Wow.
Then it has been quite a jarring start to summer to see the champions, specifically Viego and Gwen, of course, to varying degrees and various reasons for the 2 of them. But Viego is just every time going through the team fight, getting those changes, getting those resets.
This is the first time I feel like there were a lot of resets in a team fight. Just seeing so many abilities go off, it looks truly disgusting.
You're getting more than 1, and I'm starting to question what's happening here and what is going on. absolutely mind-boggling to see it happen 2 or 3 times in a team fight.
Yeah, Fofo, I think, got 3 or 4 in the team fight to get back into this game. Then there's back-to-back team fights for Kramer, where there's the one you're saying, you're highlighting, yes, that's Kramer, ELO hell Kramer popping off. And the very next team fight, he's arcane shifting into 5 members with no flash to kill a low-health Rumble who has a stopwatch. Everybody in the game buys a stopwatch. You gotta know that.
And as the great, wonderful Thanos said, balanced as all things should be. There it is. There's the balance.
So then it's a forced game 3. So we go into that one, and LGD, this time they get the Gwen. They get the OP champion for Garvey. But as I mentioned, he gets incredibly camped and is useless for the majority of the game. I will say there was a highlight reel play for Shadow on the Lee Sin, who we saw him pop off on countless times in the LEC to get LGD back in the game. It would eventually end up falling short. The positive is Shadow still looks good as a jungler. LGD as a team, still plenty of question marks.
Yeah, plenty of question marks is the polite way of putting it for LGD after this match. You're right. There does need to be a focus, let alone from people like ourselves, but the community, to realize the individual performance of someone like Shadow in this debut and what it means was positive, was good signs moving forward. And then it's still with LGD, there are positive. I was about to say positives, and I realized, well, there's a positive. There's a positive outside
GA
of
on
Shadow.
Silas.
And we're talking about Shie and his performances. Yes, it's been a while since we've been able to talk about him getting some pop off, getting to flex a bit of that skill in the mid lane. You saw it at least in this series, and hopefully we get to see more of it in a little bit of the future. And the last thing, there is actually, I lied, there was a second positive here for LGD. And that is eventually, we might get Mystic in this lineup. That's what we're still waiting on to get for them.
I mean, when you're talking about the LPL, because the top end is so stacked, right? You can talk about potentially being a playoff squad, and it's like, okay, great. You're maybe going to win a round. Maybe you can get an upset, especially when this pool of playoff teams is extended to 5 or 10, over in China. I mean, we saw how stacked the field was in spring. So for a squad like LGD, tough sled. It's tough sled.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, LGD, welcome into the playoffs. Your first round opponent is going to be FPX or EDG, or how would you like the champions? RNG? I mean, it never ends in the LPL.
In the 10-7 matchup, I mean, you're lucky if you're getting a squad like Rare Adam, who they just went head-to-head against. Fofo looked good on the Viego. Everybody looks good on the Viego. We weren't actually talking about iBoy that much in this series. He had a couple of Kaisa games, but 1-0 start for the boys from Rare Adam, 0-1 for LGD in Shadow's debut. But we're happy to see him playing back on the Rift because he is a fun player to watch. The other LPL match, JDG versus Thunder Talk. Finally, we got a game that didn't go the full distance to 3 games. And JDG, kind of like Genji, it's the same 5 boys. They're not as boring as some might say as Genji, because I believe that LPL teams sign a contract that there has to be, minimum like 20 kills a game.
I love the comparison to Genji because sure, at the end of the day, it is relatively similar. But watching the games, and you're talking about the level of excitement and pop off,
totally,
it ain't the same when you've got someone. You got the beast that is Navi in the jungle for JDG and the dominance.
Yeah.
Again, we might use that word to describe other things that happen here, but it's got to be reserved to be held on to and used for what Kanavi does in the jungle, my man. And this one, you said it, this was not a 3 game. You better believe it wasn't going to be 3 games the way that Kanavi was playing.
The first game was the big boy stomp, and that is Kanavi on the Rumble. And you want to talk about why Rumble is still OP? Watch Kanavi one combo, 100-0, guys, without even using his ult. Just a couple of harpoons and a flamethrower when he gets so far ahead. He had 18 out of the 20 kills for JDG. It was kill participation, not kills, assists as well. But 20 kills to 2. It was a stomp, as we've seen JDG do countless times.
The only thing hotter than that overheating flame spitter would be sitting on the sun. That would be the only way that you're getting a higher temperature.
And you got to be that close. You got to be sitting right on it. Game 2
you got to be on the lawn chair.
Game 2 was anything but a stomp. There was a lot of crazy back and forth team fights. We get another Viego sighting, and of course, it's Kanavi on it, who also had another standout performance on it. But this game was very much back and forth with some, I'll call them spicy team fights, and not quite as confident in JDG, but still get the 2-0.
I'll take the spicy and I'll throw in a bit of sloppy. It's a spicy sloppy Joe of a game in game number 2. But the way it is, at the end of the day, you could see just the pedigree, the difference in the talent and what they've gone up against.
Thunder Talk game.
Right, and that was the end of the day, how you saw the kind of once 25 minutes passed through, 25 minutes, that is the way that these team fights started to really slant towards.
Yeah, and that's what you would expect, JDG to be the better team fighting, skirmishing team, and that is what we saw. It's, again, so early on in the season, it's hard to really go beyond these 1 games when teams have only played a single game. We're still waiting for the LEC to play their first games, and they're smart. They kick things off the summer split, Mad Lions versus G2. There's so many storylines to be excited about in EU. The Vitality roster, Bwipo jungle, Treats jungle, but for me, I'm gonna go the boring route and just say I want to see an angry G2 who feels like they're now getting disrespected because they didn't win a split. I want to see them come back and dominate.
This has got to be absolutely mandatory if you're a League of Legends fan. I don't care if you don't like the European region. I don't care if you don't like the LEC. I don't care if you don't like Vedius. You're tuning into the LEC.
Damn, throwing Vedius.
Hey, love Vedi. My boy, you got to be saying you're watching the LEC this weekend because of the games that they've got all across the board every single day. All the storylines. There is so much excitement. Take your pick about what you want to be talking about, what you think is the juiciest, storyline match of the day, whatever. But you said to start things off, Mad Lions and G2, what that means, what that holds, the significance of this type of matchup, what it is for G2 to need to bounce back from the spring disappointment. I am all in on the LEC this weekend.
Yeah, and there are tons of matches that you can be excited about. That's the first one to kick things off, obviously, for Bwipo in the jungle. Okay, he warms things up. He gets Razor. Okay, that's tough. He's been a good jungler before. He's been all-pro. And then the next 2 games, he has to go up against Elyoya and Inspired. Talk about getting thrown right into the fire to kick off your debut as a jungler.
And it's going to be important for ourselves in the community to understand that this summer split, it's more than just 1 week, right? We need to be understanding that there's going to be other things happen. But at the same time, that's meant to be also understanding that this could possibly go in the way of someone like Bwipo. What if he absolutely dominates and performs and handles everything better than expected against these talented junglers that we talk about? Certainly want to make sure that, yes, leaning into some of that excitement if that's the way that it goes, but just as if it goes the wrong way, understanding that there is more time this split.
With G2 faltering in spring and all these kind of crazy role swaps / roster changes, we're looking at Vitality. The storylines heading into summer for EU are the most exciting of all the major regions, without a doubt.
It's crazy. You had everything going, Schalke selling things off. You got the resurgence, new lineup for Vitality. You got Bwipo in the jungle, G2 needing to bounce back. Mad Lions coming off of MSI. You've got all the changes with Misfits. There's so much here still in the LEC, and the way that's going to work out with how competitive it is from top to bottom, whether that's fighting to be the elite team in the LEC or even just fighting for that last playoff spot to squeak in and trying your best. The LEC is going to be a bonanza this summer.
If you're only watching the LCS, you're a masochist. Watch the LEC. It's one of the most exciting regions. That's it today, though, for League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you guys. Thanks for hanging. Catch you on the Flippity Flip.